Today, we celebrate the Sunday of the Holy Forefathers, which is always celebrated 2 Sundays before the Feast of the Nativity. And in many ways, the Sunday of the Forefathers is the church's first preparation for the Nativity Feast. We've been preparing ourselves through our fasting, through our prayer, for the coming Nativity Feast. But the church itself, within its services, really maintains its regular schedule of services until we get to this Sunday. And now, as we go forward to Nativity, we will be doing things to prepare the church for the coming of the incarnation of Christ. One question that people ask, and it's a good question, is, well, when we say the Sunday of the Holy Forefathers, who are we talking about? Who are these Holy Forefathers that we're commemorating and we're celebrating today? And the best way to think about it, the Holy Forefathers are those holy men and women of the Old Testament who prepared the way for Christ. We're talking about people like Moses, people like Abraham, people like Daniel, people like the 3 holy youths in the fire of the flame, all the way up to John the Baptist. Some might even say the Theotokos, people of the Old Testament times that were preparing the Jews for the coming of the Messiah. When we look at our gospel reading for today, it's a reading that we're fairly familiar with. We read it a lot in the church. The Lord is preparing a banquet, a wonderful banquet, and he goes to invite different people to the banquet, and one by one, they all have excuses. One of them says, I've just bought some land and I need to go and check on it. And the other says, I've just bought 5 oxen, and I need to go and test out my oxen. And then another one says, I just got married. I can't come to church. I can't come to your banquet. They all have excuses. And this makes the master very angry. And he says to his servants, go out and find the poor, find the hungry, find the blind, find the lame, and invite them. And he says, I've done it. And it's still not a full house. He says, and you go out into the far lands and you bring everybody in until my house is full. One way to think about who the Holy Forefathers are is they're the men that didn't have an excuse. They're the men that sat down at that banquet. When called by the master, they answered, and they didn't have an excuse. They didn't say, please have me excused. They said, Lord, here I am. And we see this in the various stories. Abraham, for instance. Abraham answered God's call to the extent that we're told he took Isaac, his only son, the one son that he truly had prayed for and loved with his wife. And he took Isaac up onto a mountain to sacrifice him because God had asked him to do that. Now, God provided that the child wasn't sacrificed. A young ram was given and the sacrifice was had. But Abraham, when called by God to do something that most anybody else would look and say, Lord, I've got something else to do. Please excuse me from this. Abraham answered that call. And that's the story of all the Holy Forefathers. Weren't perfect men by any means. But when God called, ultimately, they answered. What else do we see in today's gospel reading? There is this huge banquet. And the Lord invites everybody as he picks them out. First, he has specific guests that he wants to invite. These, of course, are the Jews in the Old Testament. And he gets excuse after excuse after excuse. Everybody has something else they have to do. We should remember, because how often have we heard somebody say, I think that God's abandoned me, or I think God has turned his back on me. What this gospel reading tells us, and it's very important to remember this, God never moves away from us. It's always us who choose to move away from God. We have some excuse. We have something better to be doing. We have something that we might think is cooler or more interesting, or will be more fun at any particular time. Basically just comes down to the question of, when we're invited, do we accept that invitation, or do we turn away and make an excuse? And in this particular reading, when the men are excused, God goes and finds others. And there's a very important lesson here. And that lesson is this: do not decline the invitation. Do not decline the invitation, because it appears that this does not make God very happy. Because he tells his servants then to go out into the streets of the city and bring in the poor, bring in the paralyzed, bring in the blind. These aren't really the kind of people we generally think that a great king is going to invite to his big dinner. But what this tells us is that who we are, our worthiness, our accomplishment, our place in society, this doesn't mean anything to God. He only asks one thing, which is, will you come? Will you come? And when the people say no, when they have an excuse, we're told in the very last line of this reading today, none of those men which were bidden, which means invited, none of those men which were invited shall taste of my supper if they've chosen not to come. It means there's not going to be a second invitation. You've been called. You've got to decide. Are you going to answer, or are you going to find an excuse, find something else to do? One question that's a reasonable question is, this is a parable and we're here in the real world. A reasonable question is, how do we accept this invitation? God's called us. He's asked us, are you going to come? How do we accept the invitation? I think we can look at our epistle reading for today. I think we can look at our epistle reading for today and find some clues as to how we accept this invitation. In the epistle reading we read, when Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then we also appear with him in glory. And then we're given some very specific instructions. Mortify therefore your members which are upon the earth. And this means kill these things off. Fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, covetousness, which is idolatry. Get rid of those things. Because they say the wrath of God comes on the children of disobedience. And also put these things away: anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth. I like that one. It's been a problem since the oldest days, apparently. Filthy communication out of your mouth. Put it away. Do not lie one to another. And it says, seeing that having put off the old man with his deeds, you've put on a new man. Which, of course, is a reference to our baptism. In baptism, we die to the old man. We put on Christ, the new man. And it ends saying there's neither Greek nor Jew, circumcision nor uncircumcision, barbarian, Scythian, bond or free, but Christ is all and in all. Again, there is no difference. Where you come from, who you are, how rich you are, how poor you are. None of that matters to God. Only one thing matters. Will you come? So brothers and sisters, as we return to this liturgy and prepare ourselves for the coming nativity of the Lord, let us, like the forefathers, claim our seat at the great banquet of the Lord, preparing ourselves through the mortifications of the passions of our flesh, perfecting ourselves by the grace of God with love and charity one to another, and with no regard for place or person, for all are welcome at God's heavenly banquet. Let us return to all of God's creation, the love that God himself offers unto us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, glory to Jesus Christ.
Glory forever.